Listener discretion is advised.
True crime can be strangely fascinating. This true crime is odd, macabre, and haunted. I'm Diane, your guide into the shadows. Welcome to Phantasmal Crime. Muriel C. Pfeil is buried in the Anchorage Memorial Park Cemetery next to her husband, Emil, who preceded her in death by 47 years, and her namesake daughter, who died 24 years prior. That daughter had been the victim of domestic violence, and a bitter divorce and custody battle ended with her blown to bits in downtown Anchorage, Alaska. It was a shocking murder, and so it is no wonder that Muriel's spirit is at unrest. Anchorage is the most populous city in the state of Alaska, and while it is an economic powerhouse and a very modern city now, its beginnings were very different. Captain James Cook was one of the first Europeans to explore along Alaska as he searched for the Northwest Passage. One of the places that he ended up anchoring a ship he named Anchor Point. That name eventually became Anchorage. The Russians brought trading posts in the 19th century and smallpox, which decimated the indigenous population. In 1912, Alaska became a United States territory, and at the time it was just a muddy tent city that was mostly used for railroad construction. The city would have an important place in the establishment of the Alaska Railroad and the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. When Prohibition was passed, bootlegging started. And through it all, Anchorage has been a dangerous place to live, even today, and especially for women. In 2022, it was reported that the state of Alaska had the highest rate of women killed by men in the nation for the 7th year in a row, especially for Indigenous women. The past was just as dangerous, and for one woman in particular, her murder would send shockwaves across the state and throughout the nation. And to this day, no one has been charged. The Pfeil family was well known in Anchorage and highly respected. The patriarch, Emil Pfeil, had been born in Seyssen, Germany in 1886 and came to the United States in 1912 at the age of 26. He landed in New York and joined the Navy, sailing to various ports around the world. In 1920, he heard about the prospecting opportunities in Alaska and headed for Anchorage. He worked as a miner at the Chickaloon coal mine until it closed, and then he worked for the Alaskan Engineering Commission as a tie cutter in Sutton. With all the railroad construction in Anchorage, blacksmithing was needed, and Emil was hired as the first blacksmith, and he worked for the railroad until his retirement in May of 1941. After that, he invested in real estate and built apartments, and he served on the city council and board of directors of the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce. Emil married Muriel Caroline Anderson in 1929, and they had 3 children, Robert, Caroline, and their youngest was named for Muriel Adele. Emil died in a plane crash in 1954, and his wife Muriel would live to be 102, dying in 2001. She would endure the tragic death of her namesake daughter in 1976. Muriel Pfeil Jr. was born in 1935, and she was considered a pioneer businesswoman in Anchorage when she opened the first travel agency in the city. She named it Professional Travel, and it did very well. In 1968, she married a man named Neil McKay. McKay had been previously married to a woman named Barbara. He and Barbara had moved to Anchorage in 1951 after he'd served as a pilot during World War II and completed law school. The first job he got in the city was as a vice president for the First National Bank of Anchorage. The bank put him in charge of mortgages, and he used information that he received to invest in properties in such a way that will eventually get him in trouble. Once he passed the Alaska Bar in 1954, he was off and running with a major focus on these real estate dealings. He quit the bank and opened up a law office in the back of a mortuary that he also ran. An undertaking lawyer. Something just doesn't seem right about that. McKay was also a man who loved his drink, and he was soon an alcoholic. His business sense was also ruthless. Business associates and his wife encouraged him to get treatment, and he was able to give up the alcohol. What he did was trade it in for drugs. In 1961, the Alaska Supreme Court suspended his law license for a year. McKay had been busted for stealing from an older neighbor who was also his client. This whole situation ends up getting very complicated because the Alaska Supreme Court and the Alaska Bar Association got into a battle over this. Alaska Supreme Court Justice Buell Nesbitt was interviewed in July of 1982, and I actually have the audio of that. I'm going to pull an excerpt here. This is him explaining how Neil McKay came to be disbarred, and again, this was recorded in 1982, so excuse the audio.
Dispute that you had with the Alaska Bar. The dispute arose over the disbarment of Neil McKay, a lawyer in Anchorage. Neil McKay had an undertaking parlor and he used to practice law out of that undertaking parlor. And he got a few cases like probate cases and people dying and divorce cases and whatnot. And he got one property case at least of an elderly Finn lady who lived right out close to where his undertaking parlor was. She drank a lot and she came to his office for advice on something in connection with a piece of property. It was very valuable. It's right at the corner of 6th and Gamble, I think now. The Bank of Alaska has a bank there now. She needed some money, and all the facts don't come clearly to me, but in essence what he did was tell her, look, I'll give you $150 a month for the rest of your life if you give me that property. Mm-hmm. She did that, but he didn't live up to his end of it in some fashion. And of course, an attorney has no right to do that anyway with a client and take advantage of him. Well, that became a discipline case before the Bar Association, and he had a number of attorneys on his side, including Stan McCutcheon by that time, and I was in the court then, and Wendell Kay and Walpole and I don't know who all, and they, according to the transcript that we later reviewed in the Supreme Court, they were circulating around amongst the Board of Governors at the time they were considering the recommendation of the trial committee. The Bar Trial Committee went all through it and held a trial and recommended that he be disbarred.
Mm-hmm. For good or only for
disbarred?
Good.
So the question is, would the Board of Governors overturn that or not?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they overturned it. So then the matter came to us for consideration. And we were of the same opinion the trial committee was, so the bar should be disbarred.
Mm-hmm.
And McKay had a lot of money. He was a very wealthy lawyer.
So basically what you heard the judge saying is, here's this guy, Neil McKay. He's got an undertaking business. He's into real estate. He's also a lawyer. He gets a few cases that are probate cases of people who are dying, and he also is getting divorce cases and whatnot. So he's getting all this information, which isn't bad for a lawyer to have, especially if they're working in your best interest. But if they're working in their own interest, that's not okay. It's illegal, actually, to do these kinds of things. And one of these properties was with this elderly Finn lady who lived right out close to where his undertaking parlor was. She was also an alcoholic, so she comes in and she tells him that she's going to need some money and what can she possibly do? And he's like, well, if you give me your property, I'll give you $150 a month for the rest of your life. And she apparently thought that was a good deal. I don't know if in the 60s that actually would be a good deal, if it was a lot of money. Regardless, he didn't pay her, so it doesn't matter what he offered her. So, of course, when the courts got wind of this, they're like, you're disbarred. And I can't believe it was only for a year. Basically, they suspended him for a year. He should have just been disbarred. You're done. You can't do that anymore as far as I'm concerned. Now, get this. That Supreme Court justice that you just heard, Buell Nesbitt, was on McKay's target list. A little while later, a criminal went to his parole officer and told him that an Anchorage lawyer, he didn't say his name, had offered him $7,500 to off Justice Buell Nesbitt. The criminal was hoping his parole officer would thank him for the information by letting him leave Alaska. So he had some ulterior motives with telling the truth here, but, if you get the truth, that's good. I don't know if that criminal got to leave Alaska, but Nesbitt did receive police protection for a few weeks after that. And in that interview that I just played an excerpt from, Nesbitt said, if it was a lawyer, it could have been nobody else but McKay. So that's who Neil McKay was. He and his wife Barbara separated in 1965. Their divorce would take 3 years to complete because McKay didn't want Barbara to have anything. He fought the divorce tooth and nail. Then he met Muriel and proposed, and the couple married on New Year's Eve in 1968. The couple were both quick to anger and fought a lot, many times with it getting physical. Muriel would claim that Neil beat her. Muriel gave birth to a son named Scotty in 1973. And let me just take a little break here. I want to throw in a little weird synchronicity here. As I was researching, I searched Muriel McKay burial to see if I could find out when Scotty was born, because I didn't know that he was born in 1973 with some of the material I had. So I was trying to dig a little bit deeper. And I don't know why I put in Muriel McKay, because she always went by her maiden name, Pfeil. But anyway, that's the way I had done it. And let me also say that Neil McKay's spelling for his last name is Mackay. So the first thing that came up was for a Muriel McKay, Mckay. So there was no A there at the beginning. She was kidnapped in December of 1969, so about this same time. She was never found and presumed dead. Her killers later confessed to burying her near a farm in Herefordshire. I was like, what are the chances that both these women, if Muriel had taken Neil's last name, she would have been Muriel McKay? You have two Muriel McKays that both die close to the end of the 1960s here. It's just like, wow, that was just weird to me. So anyway, back to the story. After 2.5 years of marriage and only 2 months after the birth of Scotty, Neil and Muriel separated. Their divorce trial that started in 1974 would be legendary, and the legal fight they had even led to a physical altercation in the court. The presiding judge ordered both to undergo psychiatric evaluations. He's like, you both have issues? You need to go get help. So you can imagine he doesn't know what to do with this kid, Scotty, because he's like, his parents are nuts. Muriel was awarded full custody of Scotty, with Neil getting visitation rights limited to part of a weekend once a month. So basically he's getting, hey, you can do Saturday or Sunday once a month. He wasn't having any of this and fought for expanded access to Scotty. And he also hatched a plan, I will say allegedly, with devastating effectiveness. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. It was almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon on September 30th, 1976, when Muriel ran out to her Volvo station wagon, parked in a downtown Anchorage lot at the intersection of L Street and 4th Avenue, that was across the street from her travel agency. She wanted to get a coat she had left in the car to show to her employees. Muriel opened the car door, leaned in, and a bomb that was planted under the hood of the car exploded. The explosion shook the local businesses and sent pieces of the Volvo flying over 100 feet in the air. Parts of the car ended up as far as 250 feet away. People ran to the wreckage and found twisted steel and a very dead 41-year-old Muriel Pfeil. The custody battle over Scotty would not end here, though. Muriel's brother, Robert Pfeil, and his wife, Marianne, took up the mantle and fought for custody of Scotty. There was an order that Scotty had to stay in Alaska, and Neil ignored that and flew with Scotty to Hawaii. And from there they continued to the tiny island of Likiep that is part of the Marshall Islands in the western Pacific Ocean. On June 30th, 1978, the custody litigation was terminated by a consent order and decree, and McKay got custody of his son, despite the clear fact that he had basically kidnapped his son. He wasn't allowed to take him. He takes him, and then he gets awarded custody of him. just will never understand some of these things. But the fight between the Pfeils and McKay wasn't over because there was still Muriel's estate hanging in the balance, and Scotty was the sole heir. And from what I saw, she was worth $1 million. So her travel agency was doing spectacular, and maybe she inherited some money when her dad passed away, although her mom lived to be 102, so I don't know that the money would have passed to Muriel yet. I'm not sure. Anyway, she had a large estate. Robert Pfeil was the estate's representative, so he sued McKay for damages and attorney costs because he had to pay detectives to find Scotty, and then he had to pay to get Scotty returned to Alaska from Lickeup Island. The Pfeils won, and McKay was ordered to pay them nearly $142,000. And yet, the battle continued. On June 29, 1983, a default judgment was entered, and McKay filed a diversity action in federal court rather than appealing the decision. This is something done when the parties of a lawsuit are citizens of different states. Neil wanted injunctive and declaratory relief, which was basically asking that there be no future damaging actions. Robert Pfeil moved for summary judgment, which was granted on April 14, 1985. McKay appealed, and there was more action at the Ninth Circuit level, and finally, on September 4, 1987, it was all over, and the original $142,000 judgment against McKay was back in place. So the Pfeils and McKay had fought for over 10 years in the courts. McKay had the final say, though, because before this final judgment was in place, Robert Pfeil was dead. On October 12th, 1985, so that final judgment's in 1987. So this is a couple years before that. Robert Pfeil was driving home from work when a vehicle pulled up beside his car and 5 shots were fired. 3 hit Robert, and he was rushed to Providence Hospital, where he told police, "The son of a bitch finally got me." Robert fought for his life for a month before succumbing to a blood clot that formed in his lungs during surgery on November 11th, 1985. The people in the car from which the shots came were driver Robert Betts and passenger John Bright. The car driven was a Lincoln Continental that Bright had borrowed from his roommate, Larry Gentry. Bright was the shooter, and he used a .45 caliber pistol that the driver, Robert Betts, had gotten from his friend, Tioga Clausen. Tioga had stolen the gun from a house where his girlfriend was house-sitting. All of these people were on drugs and soon started talking about the murder, which got Anchorage police to haul in Tioga for questioning. Tioga admitted that he stole the gun, and he said that it had been used in the Pfeil murder. Robert Betts eventually agreed to cooperate with police, and he was arrested and charged with murder, along with John Bright. Betts implicated a man named Gilbert Jr. Pfeil, who was also arrested in December of 1985. Jr. agreed to become a prosecution witness, and he wore a wiretap to try to capture a confession from Neil McKay. Jr. knew McKay because he ran a strip club in a building owned by McKay. It should be noted that the owner of the strip club was a Seattle mobster named Frank Colacurcio. Jr. claimed that McKay had offered him $10,000 to find someone to kill Robert Pfeil. The first trial in this case ended in a mistrial, and here's why. You listeners are probably all wondering, hey, what happened with the whole Muriel getting blown up? Wasn't McKay indicted for this? The answer is no. There wasn't enough evidence, apparently, to go to trial, but there was enough to create a very thick file of material in regards to Muriel's murder, and somehow that file ended up in the room during jury deliberations in April of 1986. So a second trial was held in February of 1988 in Fairbanks, and that jury acquitted Neil McKay because they didn't believe Jr.'s testimony. Some think Jr. set up the murder himself to blackmail Neil McKay. So in the end, Neil McKay was never convicted of his ex-wife Muriel's murder or the murder of her brother. On September 24, 1994, he was found dead in his condominium at the Ilokai in Waikiki. If there is any justice, he lay dead in his condo for 4 days because nobody cared about the man. Scotty McKay was living in Anchorage through the 1990s, but it's unclear where he resides now. The shooter of Robert Pfeil, John Bright, is still serving a 99-year prison sentence and made an appearance in 2008 on MSNBC's Lock Up Raw, Spring Creek, Alaska. He apparently bit off the finger of another prisoner and routinely attempts to gouge out the eyes of other inmates, so he's quite the violent guy. Muriel's case went cold and has remained that way with no witnesses and no real evidence. The only thing the combined efforts of the Anchorage Police Department, Alaska State Troopers, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the FBI were able to find is that the bomb was placed in the car sometime between 12:30 and 2 p.m. And it's like, duh. Any of us could come up with that. If she's parked the car at noon at the parking lot, comes back to it at 2 p.m., and gets blown up, of course the bomb was placed between 12 and 2. It's just so sad to see you've got all of these agencies at work, and that's all they were able to get. In 2014, a local domestic violence advocate named Liz Meredith wrote, "Time and time again, battered women I met with indicated that Muriel's death was used by their partners as a means to maintain control. Leave me, or you'll go down like Muriel did." Can you imagine? Wow, these women lived for all those years under that kind of a threat. Since Muriel didn't receive justice, there are those that claim her spirit is at unrest. The Snow City Cafe is located at 1034 West 4th Avenue in Anchorage. This downtown brunch spot opened in 1998 and is very popular. If you're in Anchorage, you've got to go there. I've been looking at their posts on Instagram, and their food looks amazing. The building had once housed Muriel's office, her travel business, and it is here that her spirit seems to have returned. Staff claim that her spirit is most active at night. She likes to mess with the water in sinks. One longtime employee was often responsible for closing up, and he would reprimand Miss Muriel, as he called her, for playing with the water in the kitchen and bathroom. He told her that he didn't like her creating more work for him. Muriel also likes to turn the lights on and off. Another employee came in really early one morning for her shift, and she was the only one in the restaurant. She heard the disembodied laughter of a woman and heard a cabinet closing. The laughter sounded like another employee, so she called her on the phone and awakened her from slumber. That employee told her that she wasn't anywhere near the cafe and that she'd just been sleeping in bed. Muriel Pfeil seems to be another statistic to add to the countless battered women that ultimately end up dead at the hands of their spouses, at least allegedly. There was no justice for her, and she was ripped from this world in one single instantaneous explosion. It is no wonder that her spirit seems locked into this earthly plane. Does Muriel Pfeil haunt the Snow City Cafe? That is for you to decide. Thank you so much for joining me on this phantasmal crime. If you have a true crime that has something paranormal connected to it that you'd like to hear about, you can write me at historygoesbump@gmail.com. I've been your host, Diane. Join me on the next episode for another trip through the shadows. This has been a production of History Goes Bump.